We don't want to push you off. I think we're good, right? How many?
I can't be the only one sitting.
Well, I know. I'm waiting for them to decide who's up in there.
I'm about 2 inches up there.
I know. Be careful.
I get too excited.
Push you over? Well, that would get people's attention, right?
That's the goal. Not to go by.
Get it started. Okay. Okay, do you want some more?
Sure, thank you.
You want some more? That's fine. Okay.
Dominic, can you inch down just?
Oh, no.
I am at that.
No, we're going to.
He's always on the edge. You know what? I'll sit down there. No. Because you're on the panel.
This is about it.
Okay. Amber.
Would you like me to just step down and?
How about?
Just a reminder to everyone, please, for silence or
Good morning. You know, that's probably right. Thank you.
Yes.
On behalf of Adoptees for Children, I'd like to welcome you to this observance of 55 years of intercountry adoption. And we certainly are celebrating 55 years of children and adoptive parents coming together into real families across the globe. But the real focus of this weekend and of the next few minutes is how to move forward with 55 years of real-life perspective from those of us who are adoptees. I was born in January 1960, abandoned and processed as Kim Kang through City Hall in Seoul, Korea. In June of 1960, at 6 months old, I arrived in Oregon to be adopted by a Colorado family. At that moment, I became Glenn Franklin Morey, oldest son of Ted and Dolly Morey, and the fourth child in their home in Littleton, Colorado. Now, the honest truth is I have adopted friends who have much, much more interesting stories than that, and I think you're going to hear some of those in a few minutes. But I know for me, my story is about the fundamental transformation of my life. From a baby lineup in City Hall to growing up the son of a rocket scientist and a mother of 7. To be loved as part of a real family for life. To be a husband and father. To be a citizen of this country, the United States of America, and to have had the life and the successes and the advantages that I've enjoyed. That's my story, and it's one that I can't even think of denying the unadopted children across the world if those children can't remain with their birth families or be adopted in their birth country. And that's what Adoptees for Children represents. Those experiences and the determination that our voices and our stories can and should inform the way to move forward in intercountry adoption. So now I'd like to introduce Ms. Tara Lynn Lehman, Associate Director of the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute. The Institute has produced a tremendous body of work on intercountry adoption experience, research that I can tell you personally has had an enormous impact on adoptees and their adoptive families. Their work underscores that intercountry adoptees have a common bond of experience in how their lives unfold, experiences that should very much inform how we move forward into the next 55 years. Ms. Tara Lynn Lehman.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Susan and Kim, as well as Holt's Board of Directors, and Glenn for being pioneers. It is truly my honor today to not only represent the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute, but also, a bit closer to my heart, to give back to Holt. But for Holt, my life may have taken a very different path. It was through Holt that I was chosen over 35 years ago by a Mennonite pacifist family living in the heart of Amish country, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I am not Amish. I also want to thank my fellow adoptees and all of you in the audience for creating the time and space to listen and share with all of us today. I trust that in the next 15 minutes that we have together, I can help you better understand the work and mission of the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute, as well as why media and language matter. Okay, first things first. Just by a quick show of hands, please, how many members of the triad, meaning adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents, are here in the audience? Wonderful. Any members of the media here? Great, welcome. And how many here are familiar with the work of the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute? Great. It's really good to know that I'm speaking with a diverse and well-informed group of folks. Inside the press kit that I hope all of you have received, there is a handout. There are several handouts from the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute, including a 2-pager about the work and mission of the Institute. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the Institute, but just a very quick overview. The mission of the Adoption Institute is to improve the lives of children and families by providing strategic leadership, education, and advocacy, all in an effort to advance stronger adoption-related laws, policies, and best practices. The Institute attains its nonpartisan and progressive voice by basing its initiatives on reliable research, broad knowledge and experience, as well as proven best practices. The Adoption Institute is not a child placement agency, and it doesn't make any money from adoption. It is a research, advocacy, and education, think, and practice tank. On the handouts, we do have additional information about our programs and our initiatives. We have the Adoptive Parent Preparation Project, the Expanding Resources for Children in Foster Care Project, Equal Rights for Adoptees and Birth Parents Advocacy, the Transcultural Adoption and Identity Project, and what I'm going to focus on today, our project focusing on adoption in the media. Why media matters and why language matters. Media matters, right? Most likely everyone here can answer that question with a resounding yes. Media matters because we all recognize that the media is an important source of information on a wide range of topics, including adoption. And its coverage of adoption-related issues does, in fact, create a space for honest discussion about specific issues, which are often a bit more complex than what is initially reported and are shown on the big and little screens. The media also, as we all know, plays a powerful role in shaping people's attitudes and opinions about adoption itself as a way of forming families, about the way people think about birth families, adopted children, and adopted adults, and how people view some of the complex issues in adoption, like search and reunion, especially within the context of the World Wide Web. That includes everyone's BFF, Facebook. So if we can agree that the power of the narrative provided by diverse media sources fuels the research, what then does the research illustrate about people's attitudes and opinions about adoption? A recent Adoption Institute study commissioned by the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption found the following regarding Americans' attitudes and opinions toward adoption. 63% of all American adults have a favorable opinion about adoption. 78% believe the country should be doing more to encourage adoption. Dr. McGraw's interview of 17,000 families detailed in his work, Families First, found 95% of adoptive parents, including those adopting from the child welfare system, would adopt again, compared with 33% of parents who said if they had to do it all over again, they would not start a family. all of us here in this room know that the research states, first and foremost, and most recently documented in Adoption Institute's Beyond Cultural Camp white paper, the overwhelming majority of adoptees, including trans-ethnic adoptees, are healthy, well-adjusted children and adults. That said, that reality does not negate the other reality, that those of us members of the triad and our supporters also need to work with those needing extra support, which is why post-adoption services, as we all know, is crucial. Now, this is what the research tells us, but we all still recognize it still is the man bites dog story that gets the headline, right? So what of the language? What of the language in the man bites dog story? Even well-meaning journalists can and have inadvertently conveyed the misconception that adoptive families are somehow less genuine, less permanent, and that those touched by adoption and their role in a family remain somehow different. This is a direct quote from a journalist who is leading a coalition of colleagues to include accurate adoption reporting protocols in the AP style book. Why does language matter? Well, we know that language shapes our culture, and the words that we choose convey vital messages, including accurate adoption language, making that essential. An estimated 6 million people in the United States were adopted into their families. As a result, about 100 million Americans have adoption within their immediate or extended families. And that's not even including the millions of birth parents and their families. And curbing the use of stereotyped, inaccurate, and even sensationalized language about adoption eases historic stigmas associated with adoption. To bring these figures into real-life conversation and practice, on the front page of the handout, the front page of the second handout is a living and breathing list of accurate and realistic words and phrases that may be helpful to continue to be mindful of in our day-to-day conversations and writings. For example, have you heard and or used the phrase real or natural parent? If you have, are you willing to suggest and or use the phrase birth or biological parent instead? What of the phrase foreign adoption? Is the phrase international or inter-country adoption more inclusive as well as realistic and accurate? How about suggesting or using the phrase child with special needs instead of hard to place? Please let me add, this list is not about being politically correct, but about accuracy and shifting the paradigm from one of deficit, less than, to one based on realism and the notion that if you are not a member of the triad but were for just one day, how would you like to be referred to? Less than or equal to? There are additional media sources, of course, that unfortunately due to time limitations, we can't cover today. But I will end on talking about the elephant in the room, the internet and adoption, and the reality that we are just a click away from instant community and complexity. Media matters, language matters, media and language matter. Context matters. And with those reminders, on behalf of the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute, thank you again for listening, and let us look forward to continuing the conversations with my comrades to the left and to the right, whose voices indeed provide the narratives that fuel the research. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tara. I'm just briefly going to explain the next part of today's program, and I think that Tara really describes it very well. One of the concerns that I have about intercountry adoption and adoption in general is that adoptees never grow up. You know, we're frozen in time. We're always referred to as the little children, the babies, and sometimes, very often, policy is dictated by the child at the time that they need to be into a family. But adoption is a lifelong experience. And so one of the things that we worry about and are concerned about is how real families, adoption is also real. And sometimes that word is not, it's as if families who have adopted and come together through adoption have to apologize or explain or to defend. And so the more normal adoption becomes, both in the way we look at the world and the world looks at us, then it will really be much more successful. I can tell you that I believe that adoption is generational. It wasn't just the generation that we came into our family that makes adoption. It permanently changes your family tree. That family has now become a whole different hierarchy simply because of the family has now embraced a child from another country and nationality. And so we're going to counter some of the stories about how real our families simply through the voices of those adoptees themselves who have grown up and are doing just fine. Thank you very much. So we're going to just start on this side, and you're going to be impressed, moved, and touched by the stories and the words from the adoptees themselves.
Good afternoon. I'll start.
Dominic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dominic.
Yes.
Can you come up?
Hold on first. Good afternoon. My name is Dominic Pangborn. I'm from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. I'm one of those very, very fortunate person. I was born in 1952 in Korea, 1 year before the Korean War ended. My father was American GI. And I think for me, I look at it as my birth at that time was a blessing. Korea had literally nothing. And what that taught me growing up in Korea the first 10 years taught me about how to create, how to be inventive. We didn't have anything, so therefore we had to be creative. I came to America at age 10. My mother came to me one day and said, "How would you like to go to America?" And of course my response was very immediate with, "Yes, I would love it." She said, "Well, you have to go by yourself." I said, "Okay, sounds good." And journey began. She talked to a Marino priest who had come to the village, and the two of them had met and made a decision. He said, I could get him into the United States. Well, little did he know that it was a big, huge challenge, because who in the world would want to adopt a 10-year-old child? Back then, it was a taboo to adopt a child over 4 years of age. When I did arrive in America, to Jackson, Michigan, I was brought to a family with 11 children of their own. Of course, no one told me this, and no one really told me or explained to me anything about adoption. All I knew was I was going to go live in America. And when I saw these 11 children, ranging from infant to about 16, I was overwhelmed. I was so excited. I said, this is America. They gathered every child in the village to welcome me. I waited a whole week wondering when the hell they were going to go home. They didn't go home. They were there. And then I realized where I was, They didn't have much. But you know what? It was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, I think it gave me a chance to be what I am today, okay? To be independent, my own self, believe in all the things that I wanted to be, Today I'm an artist that I'm very proud to be, okay? I get to do just about anything, whether just take a paper, put some paint on it, and there's people love it, I mean, that's the the thing about being here in America, being adopted, it gave me everything I could possibly. There was no way I could have had that back in Korea. Other day, I spoke to a bunch of elementary school kids, about 300 of them. One little girl got up and said, "Wouldn't you have been much more happier if you were living with your mother?" I said, "No." I said, the reason she gave me up was that she didn't give me up for the sake of herself, but she sacrificed the fact that I would be better off in America. Mind you, I was the only child in the entire region that was mixed child. And every other child would be calling me American bastard. That didn't bother me, but obviously it bothered my mother. You know, what she did was a self-sacrifice. And with that adoption, I would say was the best thing could have happened to me. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kim Hansen, and I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I was born in Seoul, I assume, in 1967, and I was adopted to a family in Minnesota in 1971, so I was 4.5 years old. And so I'm not sure if I'm one of those that is a typical adoption story or a nightmare story. But I was physically abused by this family, and after 15 months, I was rescued and adopted again by another family in Minnesota. And so I look at my life from 5.5 years old, that I had a wonderful childhood. I was blessed to have a family that loved me. I did have an older sister, 2 years old, their biological daughter. But I felt the love. I had family vacations. I knew I was different, but I was just a part of their family. And they were my mom and dad, and that was my sister. And without being adopted, I wouldn't be standing here today and being so blessed with a family of my own. And I have to say I have the most beautiful family. I married my high school sweetheart. We started dating when we were 14, and we got married after our college. And we had our first daughter, and she's 20. And beautiful, Swedish, Norwegian, Korean. And then 4 years later, had my son, very handsome, but I might be biased. And so when he was 4, I thought, oh, I'm done with the baby stage. We're out of diapers. I don't need to carry a diaper bag as my purse. We're done. And then God tapped me on the shoulder and said, what about you being adopted and your wish as a child? When I was being abused and sitting on that bed by myself, I said, when I get out and when I make it, I am going to adopt a little girl from Korea, because I know when I get out, I will be successful. And so in 1998, my daughter came home from Korea. And at that point, I couldn't specify a gender. And I was like, what? I'm Korean, though. And you know, God once again comes in and says, we have a baby girl for you. And what a full circle moment for me, life circle moment, reading her bio history. And because I don't have any information on myself. But what a blessing it was for me to be able to read that and be grateful to my birth mother. And here I was reading about my daughter's birth mother, and I was so grateful. And being a parent already, that was the hardest thing for me to read, and the greatest gift that anyone can get in life is a child. And so I'm standing here today because of adoption, and I'm blessed to be able to give back to Holt, because without Holt I wouldn't be here. And the biggest honor is for me to be able to serve on the board of directors. And I see myself as a giant, even at 5'1", that I can be a voice for all of us up here and for all of you that are out there being adoptive parents, saying, yes, adoption, it works. Because I face a lot of challenges in my life. I am one of those statistics. My parents divorced when I was 13, and my father passed away when I was 18. But I was still determined to make it, and I did. And that's why I'm standing here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Lee. I'm really proud to be adopted. I was born in Busan, South Korea, and grew up in rural Missouri, the sticks. It was a real big hick. But when I was a teenager, I kind of stumbled into Korean heritage camps just by happenstance, and it really changed my life at the age of 14. I didn't realize it then, but in 1998, I went with the adoption agency to go to Korea, and I went into the Holt office and said, "Can I look at my file?" And I looked at it, and my mom had sent all these pictures of me as a kid growing up in Missouri to Korea, just in case my biological family went. I knew I was going to be a mess. Dang it. But I remember I asked the social worker, I said, can you find my birth parents? And she said, no, that's not how it works. We do a search back in the United States, and then you can come back and we can see if you can meet them. And I said, oh, no, this is my only time I'll go to Korea. And I must have left an impression with her, because when I left, she looked for my birth parents. I didn't realize that at the time. I had already moved on. But about 5 days before I left Korea, my birth mother wanted to find me. She wanted to meet me. So my story is that my biological mother and father were still married, and they had 3 daughters. And so, well, 4 if you include me. And at the time, my sisters were 2 and 1, and then my birth mother was pregnant with me. And my birth father was working away at sea, and I'm still unclear on the story, but she gave birth and made an adoption plan for me. And then when my birth father came home, she told him that I had died at birth. So she kept that secret, and in consoling one another, they got pregnant again and had my youngest sister. And because he was home, they kept her. So she had kept that secret for 18 years. She didn't tell anyone in her family that she had actually relinquished me to the United States. Meanwhile, I'm hunting and fishing with my dad in Missouri. But since then, I've gone back 3 times. Usually we volunteer and try to escort a baby back to the United States. But I have grown up now almost my whole entire adult life with these 3 siblings in Korea who don't know the language that I speak, and we definitely have different, ideas of what a woman should be, because a Korean woman is this, an American woman is this. And I had kind of given up hope on having a real relationship with them for the long term. But a year ago, my sister married a guy from Wisconsin, a white guy from Wisconsin. So they asked my husband and I to go to Korea and support them in their wedding. And in fact, then my Korean family asked us to have a Korean traditional wedding, which actually I didn't want to steal my sister's thunder, so I said no, but Korean people are very insistent. So, so we had a dual Korean traditional wedding. And now, there are talks of maybe them one day coming to the United States, which is crazy for me. So meeting my Korean family has definitely changed my life, and it's my dream to have my parents meet my Korean parents, because they haven't done that yet. And it's a developing relationship and an evolving relationship that I've had. So, adoption is certainly not easy. I have a positive story, but it has not brought me closure by any means. And, there are still so many answers that I don't know. And I try to get them from my biological family, and I get 2 different stories. So I still don't know a lot about my birthplace. I still don't know about the circumstances surrounding my adoption plan, because I've heard that they were poor, and I've also heard that there was pressure to have a son. So I really haven't gotten a straight answer. But adoption has changed my life. It's brought me here. And, because of adoption, I have 2 wonderful families. And, I am a television journalist, so I do know that media and language matter. And I will tell you, a lot of newsrooms don't it's not intentional. A lot of people just don't have an experience with adoption to know the language. But I do spend a lot of time educating people if I can. Just one person at a time, right? But that's my story, so thank you.
My name is Adam Connor, and I was adopted from South Korea when I was about 3 months old. And according to my parents, it was December when I was adopted and landed in Hawaii. And for the first 5 to 10 minutes afterwards, they thought they had actually gotten a girl because I was in a pink snowsuit, which was apparently not temperately appropriate for the Hawaii weather. And there was a particular amount of confusion among everyone, but everything kind of worked out in the end. And I grew up primarily in New Mexico, so I grew up in almost a different foreign country at times, where everyone was a little different. But honestly, I think, whereas I know many of the traditional struggles faced by adopted children growing up, I watched my sister go through, who's also adopted, go through many of those same challenges. I think I probably was lucky to skip over some of those or not have to deal with them in the same way I think other people did. But it has been a tremendously positive influence in the sense that I've always just considered myself lucky, and I think that's a great gift to have in life, to consider yourself lucky as you go through life. And I think that it's great to be here and to share these stories. I think they're important stories. I think that for many people, adoption is talked about in the context of being a choice. It's a choice of parents to give up children. It's a choice of parents to adopt. And for children, it's just something you inherit. It's a reality that you're born with, just like anything else you're born with, whether that's the color of the skin or where your parents or where you end up in life. And so I think that is part of the conflict for individuals, to understand that something is very often talked about as a choice is not a choice, honestly, for the person it affects most. But it is often a wonderful gift, and I think it's great that we're all here to share our stories. And I think that having worked here in Washington now for many years, the idea of something with a 63% approval rating is actually wonderful. And I know my friend New is probably jealous of those kind of polling numbers. But I think one of the gifts I've been given is, for the last several years, I've worked for Facebook, which has grown from a company that has started in a college dorm room to something that has more than 500 million people worldwide on it. And I think that occasionally I will hear these stories, whether in the media or people who tell us at Facebook, about lives that have been changed by the simple act of connection that wasn't possible before. And so whether that's across state lines, whether that's across oceans, wherever that is, the idea that people can connect and find people before they haven't. MTV just did a great special about someone who had been adopted and found their brothers and sisters here in the United States, and it's just, we know these are being replicated at scale. And so one of the great blessings and occasionally challenges of the future will be this more interconnected world, where information and where people are able to move around the world in such a faster manner. But I think it opens up a door of possibility for connections that didn't exist before. And I think that's only going to be a greater thing, not just for connecting with family that you may not have known you had, but also for connecting with people who have similar experiences. And so kids who may have met at Korean camp one summer and then never seen each other again, all of a sudden can have a persistent connection through life. And we think that's a wonderful thing. And that idea of communication and connection is something I'm very proud to be a part of, and I'm glad to hear other stories shared here today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amber, and I'm not adopted through Holt, so I'm a little bit bummed. I was adopted from Ethiopia in 1970. I'm told I was born in 1961 in northern Ethiopia. I came by the way of adoption because I have a special needs. And does the language of adoption matter? Yes, it does, especially when you carry those titles and they are titles given to you by others. I grew up in Minnesota with a Norwegian farm family. My parents, I don't know whether they were crazy or brave, but they had already raised their 2 biological sons and 2 biological daughters. They had helped them through college. My brothers and sisters were married and were creating their own families when my parents decided to go to Ethiopia to do some mission work. And they came to do the work in my orphanage. I was living in an orphanage called the Cheshire Home, which was started by a British man. They worked there for a year. My dad was not only a skilled farmer, but he was a skilled carpenter. So he helped build the beds and the buildings in our new orphanage facility. And my mother, I remember her sewing elastic in our underwear, which were donated from the United States, that came with no elastics on them. And I still haven't figured out why that was happening, but it did anyway. So, and then after they came back to the United States, they decided to adopt, and I was the one that was chosen. My dad said, "Oh, we had several other choices, but we settled on you." And I'm glad they did. I work in the adoption field many years later. It was not a field that I had considered, considering that my life story is about adoption and about being adopted. But when I decided to look for a career, think of a career, I wanted to be a social worker, mainly because I thought it would be a career that would take me back to Ethiopia, not on the basis of adoption, but the fact that I could go and perhaps make a difference there for others. That was my main thinking. It's a flexible career. I can work here, I can work there, that kind of a choice. But fate has a way of making things work in such a way that we don't even vision. Eventually, I ended up in California after I finished my bachelor's degree in social work, working for an adoption agency. Funny. And in that adoption agency, as a social worker with a BA degree, I did a lot of home study preparation for children that were being adopted from Holt, through Holt. Many Korean babies, many babies from India. I loved them all because they were always thrilled to see my brown face. I was one of the few brown social workers. A few years after that, actually about 11 years after that, I started thinking about Ethiopia. And again, just by, I can't say coincidence, but you know what I mean. An Ethiopian woman wanted to adopt from Ethiopia. She only knew of a social worker from Ethiopia, being me. So she calls me as if I should know every detail about Ethiopia and said, "I want to adopt from Ethiopia, and can you help me?" I knew nothing. It hadn't even crossed my mind that people could or would adopt from Ethiopia. But I'm adventurous, and so I said, sure, let's try. Let's contact the government. Let's see what process they have. Let's get your things going. At least we know what it takes on this end. So her adoption process began my work in Ethiopia. She went to Ethiopia and was stuck there for about a year. And then I decided to go and see what was happening with her in helping. And then the Ethiopian government asked us if I could start working there because I was able to tell them my story. And their take was, our own has come back. She has come back, and look what has happened for her, and look what could happen for other children. And my story to them was we could place all children. It wasn't just babies, it wasn't just healthy babies, but children with medical needs, older children, children with sibling groups. And that is being done out of Ethiopia now for about over 10 years. Does media matter? Yes, it matters. Does adoption matter? Yes, for those of us who don't have family, adoption does matter. I think those that minimize it usually do not know how important having a family is. And you don't know that until you don't have one. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Wechsler. I was born in Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War. I was the child of a Vietnamese woman and an American serviceman. We don't know that, but that's the orphanage that I was had a note in my file that said that. I came over as a part of Operation Baby Lift, which was a well, everyone, I'm used to explaining that, but everyone in this room knows. Actually, I came over with Tara, and it's funny because I'm a lifelong Democrat, but my Republican friends love to point out that I'm in the U.S. as a result of a Republican president, President Ford. When I came over, I was very sick. I've gone through some of the medical records, and all of these. I was 2. I had been in an orphanage in North Vietnam for 2 years. I was malnourished. I had a distended stomach. The back of my head was flat from lying down all the time, and so the first family that adopted me in the U.S. Kept me for about 2 weeks and then brought me back. I didn't know you could do that, but they brought me back, and then my mom, who was actually pregnant with my brother at the time, really wanted to adopt another baby. At the time, all of the at the end of the Vietnam War and with Operation Baby Lift. There was a lot of publicity, and she really wanted to do that, and so my family adopted me. And it's sort of interesting because now adoption is so much more commonplace, but at the time then, people they would look at my brother and I, who are roughly the same age, and ask my mom, well, why'd you adopt? Or they would ask me, and it's just you see how, as Tara was talking earlier, how the sort of news coverage, and when people see more of that, they become more comfortable. And it really has changed, but at the time they would ask that, and it's just and so anyway. So I grew up with a brother and a sister. Neither of them are adopted. In a town in western North Carolina, Highlands, North Carolina, population 990. I think it was until I was in college that I met anyone else who was adopted. I knew about it, and it was never really an issue for me, but it was always something that I never really knew much about. And then after a couple years after college, I came to D.C., and a lot changed. I was working for Senator Landrieu, who some of you may have worked with before. She's a huge advocate for international adoption. And I met Susan. And Susan was, I feel like, in and out of her office every week. And it wasn't, I think maybe it was Mary that introduced us and said, okay, you guys need to talk. And it was a great connection. And Susan said, well, I'm doing this event for the 25th anniversary of the Operation Baby Lift, and we're doing it at the Vietnam Memorial in D.C. Do you want to speak at it? I said, okay, well, I've never really done anything like that, but I think I'll do it. And ended up going to with my mom this event that they were doing, and it was the first real reunion event that I had been to. I know they've done other ones that I didn't attend, and it was really interesting because it was for the first time, you saw all of these folks from all around the country that had similar shared experiences, who sort of connected, and it was great. So as a result, have been very close friends with Susan and Tara ever since. Here we are, 10, 11 years later. I'm still in D.C. In 2004, I had a chance to go back to Vietnam for the first time, and it was great. It wasn't really, I wasn't searching for birth parents because my records I don't have enough information for that. But it was, I was there mainly just to explore and just to see. I had a couple of friends meet me, and I was there for about a week, and it was great. I still stay involved with adoption policy, partially through my job now, and just as a personal interest. I've been involved with a group in D.C. called Asian American Lead that does a lot of work for Vietnamese refugee families in D.C. And do some work with Vietnam veterans who sort of struggle with their purpose and the work and what they did over there. So anyway, that's my story. I consider myself very, very fortunate. I just want to add with, on to what Adam said about Facebook, is that it really is different. I feel like the kids that had similar experiences to mine growing up in the age of social networking are going to have a completely different experience, and I'm really glad about that.
Hello, my name is Kim Brown. I was born in Daejeon, South Korea in 1955, and my birth mother had moved to Seoul because at the time there was very little food to be had and living in the streets, and she decided Seoul would give her a better opportunity to raise me. And she did her very best, but finally, after about 5 or 6 months, she decided she could not do that. So she gave me up and relinquished me to an orphanage there. At the same time, there was a couple in Omaha, Nebraska, who had found themselves pregnant late in life and had lost the baby at childbirth. And they contacted a friend who contacted a friend in South Korea, said, could you get a child for us out of Korea? So a gentleman went to an orphanage and in Seoul and found a little boy and went home and quickly wrote a letter and said, there was no Facebook then, Adam, quickly wrote a letter and said, I found a little boy. And that little boy passed away a week later. So my parents, once again, a few weeks later, said, could you do it one more time? So he went down to the same orphanage and went through the rows of cribs, and lo and behold, he pulled me out of the orphanage and took me home with him to make sure that this little boy standing before you would not pass away before I could go to Omaha, Nebraska to be raised. People were talking about identity, and as I was struggling for my identity, my name, Kim Sundell Brown, Kim is certainly a Korean name. Sundell is my mother's maiden name, which is Swedish, and Brown, of course, is English. So growing up, I had a little bit of an identity crisis trying to figure out what exactly I was. But I was raised by a warm, loving family, large family, somewhat iconic in the Omaha area. And, truly it was a great experience. I was not adopted through Holt. I was brought over to the United States prior to Holt's work, just a few months. And so I didn't grow up with an agency in my background or discussions about agencies. It wasn't really until my wife and I decided to adopt a child from Korea. The gentleman who pulled me out of that orphanage was still alive. We contacted him, and he said, you should use Holt. So that was the beginning of my relationship with Holt International. And we adopted 2 wonderful kids from Holt. And I remember laying in bed when they were about 3 and 5, and they'd get up in the morning and run in and lay in bed with me. And I thought, it just doesn't get any better than this. And just laying on either side of me. Little did I know that my life would certainly improve as an adoptee and being able to give back. Later, I've had people ask me, is adoption really something that's viable? Is it something that's good? And I'm not saying these last statements to you from a prideful standpoint, but let me tell you why I personally think it is good. I not only survived physically, because I would not have made it physically. I suffered from malnutrition and chickenpox and all sorts of things. I've had the opportunity to adopt and have a family because of adoption. I have, among other things, been able to meet the president of South Korea. I remember sitting at the top of the Samsung building in South Korea having dinner and looking down on the city and saying, what were the odds as I began life that I'd be doing this tonight? And I also now am the president of Holt International. I consider myself to be very fortunate, very blessed. I consider myself to have a tremendous responsibility to continue to make this a possibility, adoption a possibility for more children. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, all of you panelists. I told you that their stories would be interesting, and I hope you agree. We're going to wrap this up now. I just want to take a moment to thank Tara for her message of that media matters and that language matters, and that was a great message for us all to hear. I want to thank the panelists for their remarkable stories and for sharing with us so frankly and candidly. And I want to thank everyone who is involved with Adoptees for Children. Your stories, your voices are so important because they are the voices for unadopted children all around the world who have no voice. And I so appreciate your contributions to that. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. We just thought that this was an important way to begin the forum. As you can see,